So you've talked about politics. Let's be a little more specific about what happened in the last legislative session. So in that session, there was an enormous win, we might say, in that there was $11.6 billion school finance bill that was passed that promised to increase funding per student and to reduce property taxes across the state. So the governor said this about that. We did something that was considered to be highly improbable, and that is to be able to transform public education in the state of Texas without a court order forcing us to do so. This one law does more to advance education in the state of Texas than any law that I've seen in my adult lifetime in the state of Texas. Now, okay, that's grandiose language. I also would like to point out that it is the state's responsibility to provide the full funding for public education in the state of Texas, and to celebrate that this was such an extraordinary and improbable achievement is an indictment on our politics, not a celebration of it, okay? So let's be clear about that. Well, let's also be clear about the fact that the state had been cutting budget money to public education for several legislatures in a row. And this was an attempt to catch up and refund what had already been cut, and still has not actually reached a level that it should. And let's also be clear about the support for expansion of charter schools, which drain money from public schools all along the way, as well as the attempt to privatize even more with vouchers that would bleed public education. But at least we can say, yes, we got this funding. But now, excuse my rant, but now that we—
No, it's good. I keep going, George. It's very good.
but now that I've at least gotten that out, Miguel, all right, can you talk for a minute about how the legislature, the state, affects local school districts like the DISD in terms of the parameters it puts on funding and what's possible, because that's one of the reasons we have a bond election, because of the limitations, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great windup, and look, it's important to understand that, like, at the end of the legislative session, there was a lot of congratulatory language amongst legislators. Some of that didn't sit well with me, very much because of the reasons that you suggested. But I am proud of the fact that our legislature did ultimately do something, and that something is already having an impact in DISD. But we are also now beginning to see some of the offspring of the bill that people weren't paying attention to, that people weren't telling you about, like the fact that you could tank a bond by essentially not being truthful with the taxpayer when they go in to vote for a bond. My hope, and we've been working very hard, is that people will pass this bond. However, if people don't think that if they think that they are going to have their taxes increased and they don't vote for it, I don't know how we're going to pass a bond ever moving forward, because whoever wants their taxes increased. So we are now starting, and our legislators need to be reminded about the total bill and how the total bill is impacting our school funding and our kids. But the way that the legislature essentially controls education is it's really through funding. I mean, we carry a lot of funds from the state, and without those funds, it significantly impacts us. And the ramifications of them cutting $5 billion back in 2011 meant that we had to close 12 schools, and that was very difficult as an administration, as a board. I wasn't on there, but as soon as I got on, I saw the devastation that those cuts caused. But what this bill did was it essentially took sort of the same approach that President Obama took with the Race to the Top grants. It's essentially using funding to incentivize districts to do certain things. Early childhood education would have been one. It allowed us to now expand early childhood education. extended year learning. This is something that we are really looking at right now to try to mitigate learning loss from COVID. If we want funding from the state to do that, we now have the ability to do it, but we can't, like, those monies can only be used to extend the year. So there's sort of like a carrot and a stick approach to the funding. And they, in some ways, if you don't want to do what they want you to do, then you don't get the